Hi, my name's Bob Baker. We'd like to welcome everybody in Pella to the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum here in Knoxville, Iowa. We're located right next to Knoxville Raceway, and we are the only museum in the whole world that's solely dedicated to sprint car racing. So we're just going to take a quick walk through the museum and let you see some of the race cars we have on display. If you've been here before, we'd like to encourage you to come back because we do change out the exhibits and the race cars very frequently. So things change here all the time inside the museum. The first car that we have here, the 99 car, is Jan Opperman's race car. It's a very popular car back in the eastern part of the United States, Ohio and Pennsylvania. Jan Opperman was the original outlaw. He didn't race with any group or sanctioning body. He raced wherever it paid the most money. So he was one of the original outlaws of racing, and we're very proud to have his hippie hat. The leather hat you see here in the case is one of our prized possessions of the museum. We've been offered lots of money for that hat before, but it stays here forever and ever, like Jan's family and all the sprint car racing fans would like to see it. So we'll just kind of walk through and let you take some videos of the cars. You see the winged race cars, and of course the videos are playing in the background. We change out the videos to coincide with the race cars that are on display inside the museum. And there's also a placard that you're looking at. There's a placard for each car that describes the driver of the car, the builder of the car, where the race car raced at, and all the other different information on each of the race cars that's on display here inside the museum. We do primarily focus on sprint car racing, but from time to time we have other open-wheel dirt track and pavement race cars with us. These are super modified cars that race down in the Oklahoma area with the NCRA, the National Championship Racing Association races. So very similar chassis and design to sprint car racing, just without the wings on the top, more of a coupe look with the roof on the top, and of course not a sprint car tail, but a sportsman type tail on the back of the cars. It's more of a rectangular type or square type of fuel cell for the race car's fuel. The black and white number 22 car that you're looking at is a midget race car. Of course, a very small car compared to the sprint cars. It's a 4-cylinder engine. This car was raced back in the 40s and 50s. Besides being a smaller car with smaller horsepower, there are very powerful cars for the size of the car. Of course, the midgets have 13-inch tires and wheels compared to the 15-inch tires and wheels on the sprint cars. And as you can see, very little protection back in the early days of racing. No roll bars, no roll cages, not even any seat belts in the race cars. So they're a very primitive form of racing back in the very beginning. And right next to it, a modern day midget race car with the full roll cage and protection with the seat belts and other arm restraints for the race car driver while he's driving. One of our Hall of Famers, Joey Saldana. This is his race car. It's a wing sprint car, just like you see race every Saturday night here at Knoxville. We're very proud that we have an all sprint car racing program at Knoxville Raceway every Saturday. That's the only type of race car that's featured. We have 410, 360, and of course the Pace Pro Sprint race cars. So 3 classes of sprint cars. The main difference is the size of the engine. The cars are all basically the same, but the engines, 410 cubic inches on the 410s, 360 cubic inches on the 360s, and the Pace Pro Sprints are more of like a crate type spec engine on those cars. If you look across the museum, you can see a wide variety of sprint cars on display. We actually have a timeline set up where you can see the progression of sprint car racing. The car in the front, the Vice Grips car, is the car Steve Kinzer, the King of the Outlaws, won his first Knoxville Nationals in back here in 1980. The video you hear playing in the background is one of the TVs, one of the monitors that's playing with a description of races that the cars have raced in that we're looking at. Of course, you can see inside the cockpit, very primitive back in the 1980s. Again, very little protection compared to modern day sprint car racing that we see every Saturday night here in Knoxville. This season is going to start on April 20th. Saturday, April 20th will be opening night here at Knoxville Raceway. And a lot of people like to come to the museum during the afternoon, spend some time in the museum, find some things to do around Knoxville. There's always a lot of fun things like Slideways Karting Center and the different restaurants in town. Then make a night of it with the Saturday night sprint car races here at Knoxville Raceway. This is a 1930s era garage. It's the John Gerber garage. It's a semi-permanent exhibit here at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame Museum. When John Gerber passed away, his wife donated everything from their garage, his race shop, and his race car to us. So this is a 1930s era big car. Of course, big car racing was the predecessor of sprint car racing. So before they were known as sprint cars, they were called big cars. As you can see, they're very crude, very, very little safety equipment on the cars. And as John's wife told us, John made every piece and part for this race car by hand in this shop for his race car. All the engine parts, assembling the engine, everything for the race car except for the tires and wheels. The tires and wheels he ordered from a catalog. And that's very different from today's modern day era of sprint car racing, because today, if there's a crash on the racetrack, new parts are ordered for the race car and bolted on and put the race car back together. Whereas back in the 1930s, they didn't have that luxury. So if there was a crash, they would run out on the racetrack, pick up the parts, take them home, and weld them back on the race car to come and race the next weekend. So a lot of these cars, like John Gerber's car, raced for 30 or 40 years before they were retired, which today's racing, like you see at Knoxville every Saturday night, if there's a crash, those parts are usually pretty much thrown away. New parts are put on the race car, and the car comes back out sometimes the same night even at the races to race again. So as we just kind of go down the line, you can kind of see the progression of sprint car racing. Here's two more examples of big cars that raced back in the 30s and 40s. Again, very little protection for the drivers, with no roll bars, no roll cages, in many cases, no seat belts, definitely no arm restraints or pads to keep the driver safe if the cars were to turn over. It was a very treacherous time in racing, a dangerous time for race car drivers back in the 30s, 40s, and even 50s. You know, years before the roll cages and the safety equipment and the new construction of the race cars, which kept the cars together a lot better if they did turn over. Not to mention having the wings on top of the car as a safety feature, and also an aerodynamic advantage to hold the car on the racetrack, to push all that wind down to give the cars better traction on the dirt tracks. This is our international section of the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum. We have a lot of artifacts from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and a few other countries where sprint car racing is popular. But Australia and New Zealand are really hot countries for sprint car racing also. The car you're looking at is the only car in our museum that we've ever had from Australia, the only sprint car from Australia in our museum. This car was put together, taken apart, put in one of the containers, brought across the ocean to America, and then reassembled so that we could have an Australian sprint car right here in our museum. We're very thankful to Cricky Brothers and all the people who helped make this possible, Skip Jackson, Brooke Tatnell, and others who helped put this car back together after the container brought the parts over to America. So the first Australian sprint car in our museum, we're very happy to have it on display. As you can see, it looks almost exactly like the sprint cars in America. There are a few small details that are different, with some side panels right next to where the driver sits in the car. And of course, the seats sometimes can be a little different, as well as the exhaust mufflers and some of those other parts on the car. Demonstration car here, but you could see the earlier sprint cars from Pennsylvania, the cars that race at Knoxville, like the super modified, roadster type super modifieds, the old big cars, you know, like we have here before they were sprint cars that raced. The California sprint car. The big car you're looking at is probably the most expensive car in our museum. It's insured for over $200,000 and was driven by very many famous Hall of Fame sprint car drivers. Of course, it's been totally restored. It did not look this pretty when it was being raced, but it's a beautiful example of a big car from back in the 30s and 40s. In addition to the sprint cars and the super modifieds and the midgets in our museum, every once in a while we'll have a dirt champ car which is almost exactly like a sprint car, except for it's a longer wheelbase and it has a larger fuel cell. The Dirt Champ cars were built for racing on 1 mile dirt tracks versus the smaller dirt tracks, so the large fuel cell allows them to continue on a 100-lap race on a mile track, 100 miles without stopping. So that's the major difference, is the wheelbase and the long fuel cell, large fuel cell on the back. Again, it's kind of fun to see the difference between the big cars of the 1930s that you can see here on the left, the yellow big car, and the modern day wing sprint car that we have on the right.
I can pause if you need to.
Oh, I don't.
So I was kind of in the wholesale business, and I didn't want to go far.
Another one of our semi-permanent exhibits here at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame is our Bob Trossel garage. Bob Trossel and his family and friends built over 500 sprint cars in a garage exactly this size, about 3 blocks from the Iowa State Fairgrounds up in Des Moines, Iowa. And Bob Trossel was a lifelong friend of Carl Moyer. A lot of people might know Carl from his Carl Chevrolet dealership up in Ankeny, Iowa. But Bob Trossel and Carl Moyer were very good friends and drag racing buddies. And one night the drag races up in Des Moines were rained out, so Bob decided to bring his wife down to Knoxville for a Saturday night sprint car race. And he just really fell in love with sprint car racing, he felt like it was more exciting than the drag racing. So he sold all of his drag racing equipment, got into sprint car racing, and the number 96 car that you're looking at is the very first sprint car that Bob Trossel built. Again, without the roll cage, but it does have the post in it where you could add the add-on roll cage, or the bolt-on roll cages as they were called, back in the early 1970s. So this garage is exactly the size and how Bob Trossel's garage looked behind his house, where he built all the race cars that are so famous. And his cars were shipped not only in this country, in the United States, but also to Australia and New Zealand for sprint car racing in those countries. So Bob Trossel is one of our treasured National Sprint Car Hall of Fame inductees, very well known across the world in sprint car racing. The engine that we have sitting here next to the Bob Trossel garage is a 410 cubic inch engine, which was donated to our museum by Richard and Jennifer Marshall. This is the type of engine, the exact type of engine that you would see racing here on Saturday nights at Knoxville Raceway in a 410 sprint car. The engines are roughly $70,000 per engine, and they're made to last, to run properly for only about 8 to 10 nights. After that, they need to be taken out of the race car and sent back to the engine builder to be refreshened. And in that time, a second engine is put in the race car to race, with the hopes that the first engine will be refreshened and be on their way back. So a lot of the teams that race, you'll see them driving down the highway in 18-wheelers, and they've got several engines, up to sometimes 7 or 8 engines inside those 18-wheelers, the semi-trucks that haul the race cars. And they'll have 2 or 3 race cars in addition to the engines, tires, and all the equipment they need to put a brand new race car together in case of an accident, or in case an engine, malfunctions and blows up. You just never know at a racetrack what's going to happen. So most of the major teams carry lots of spare engines, parts, and chassis inside those big trucks and trailers that you see at the racetrack. Earlier we were talking about how easy or how hard it is to get in and out of the race cars. And this is a car we have in our museum that we allow the public to crawl in and out of so you can get like photo ops or pictures in the car. But one thing that makes it easier to get in and out of the car is the quick release on the steering wheel. You can just pop this lever and the steering wheel comes off to make it easy to get in and out of the race car. And then after you're in the race car, it's very easy to take the steering wheel, put it back on. And that's something that's on the non-wing sprint cars and also the wing sprint cars, help the drivers get in and out of the cars. Also, if there's an accident, it facilitates them being taken out of the car quickly. We'll look at some more sprint cars, and then we'll go look around the rest of the museum. The big wall you see in the background is from Ascot Racetrack out in Gardena, California. Unfortunately, the track is not in existence anymore, but somebody had the wherewithal to take the old 19-second club wall that you would see when you walked into the grandstands. This was put up behind the grandstands, and you could see whoever had fast time, the track records were always posted on this wall, so you knew with the track record who was the fastest car at the racetrack when you went every week to the races. And you can see that went down and went down and went down to where it became like an 18 and 17 second club in later years before the track was taken down. The yellow 55 car is a car that was donated to our museum by Bob Elder out of Belleville, Illinois. And Tom Bigelow was the driver of the car. It's a USAC, United States Auto Club, non-wing sprint car. Bob Elder was a big supporter of sprint car racing, and not only did he have his own cars that he raced, but he helped race teams across the Midwest with engines and other parts as donations to help keep the race cars on the racetrack. So most of the cars you've looked at and you've seen inside our museum are donated to, or not donated to us. They're loaned to us by people who have restored them. And we do have a few cars like Bob Elder's number 55 that have been donated to us in the past. One thing we started just a few years ago is we started collecting samples from different dirt from different racetracks. So depending on what part of the country you live in, you can come in and you can try to see if you can find the dirt from your racetrack. I'm not going to show you which one is the Knoxville Raceway dirt because we'll leave that for you to find when you come in here. But we have dirt from racetracks all across the country and a few from Australia. And that's always fun for people to pick out the dirt from their racetrack. This one's, I think, pretty easy to find, though. That's the Bonneville Salt Flats out in Utah. These trophies, some of these old trophies are really cool. They had a lot more artistry and creativity in the older trophies than some of the newer trophies that we have. And those are always fun to look at and learn the history of the trophies and the people that drove cars and won the races back in the day. A lot of those trophies that we have here are from the big car races back in the 30s and 40s. Of course, we have a huge helmet selection. People have donated or loaned us these helmets so race fans can see the protection the helmets provide the drivers while they're racing. A lot of the drivers like to have a nice fancy helmet in here that's all painted up, but we really prefer the helmets that are kind of beat up a little bit because it shows the protection it provides the driver's face from the dirt clods and the rocks and the different things that fly up into your face while you're driving on a dirt track. So if you look closely at some of the ones that have the paint scraped off them, those are the ones we really like to get that show the protection that the drivers get with the helmet on versus the old leather caps that they used to wear back in the 30s with the big cars.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but they would use some kind of goggles back then?
Yep,
Is that
yep.
correct?
They used to, let's see, we had some here in the past. See if they're still, here they are. There's goggles like this that were face goggles and some that were just goggles like on that mask back there that just had the goggles on them just to protect the eyes. Some of these old Cromwell type helmets just protect like the dome of your head.
And Bob, how fast do they typically go when they're racing and
Well,
speed-wise?
the top speed for a sprint car is 211 miles an hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats, but they don't go that fast on a dirt track like Knoxville Raceway, of course, because it's dirt and the cars are turning. So they're averaging over 120 miles an hour, but a top speed of over 140 miles an hour when they get to the end of the straightaway to start to make that turn, to go through the turns.
That's amazing.
Sure. I don't know if you want to take any pictures inside the museum store. Our museum store is open 7 days a week, year-round, just like the museum. We're only closed 4 days, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and New Year's. So we're open year-round for race fans to come in, take a look at the race cars, and do some shopping. We have lots of a variety of different items for sale besides just the wearing apparel, the hats, and the die-cast cars. Believe it or not, our most popular item in the museum are the books that we sell. We sell a lot of books, and you can look at our bookcase back here. We even have other libraries and other museums that order books from us for their museums. So we have a complete collection of open wheel and sprint car racing books for sale that are very, very popular with the people who come into the museum, especially the historians, the people interested in the history of the sport of sprint car racing.
It looks like there may be some DVD
Yep.
of races
Yep.
also.
We have some DVDs of racing in the past also. Little die-cast cars. People collect those and have collections of them at home. They're not really for playing like a child's toy. They're more for a display of their favorite drivers. You want to go upstairs and look at the Hall of Fame? And okay. Really kind of a unique area in that we have a large area to the left that we rent out for different occasions. We have wedding receptions, birthday parties, family gatherings, you name it. We've had just about every type of event up here. We've had weddings, wedding receptions. We've had a few funerals up here. We do the Pinewood Derbies for the Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts in the area, so that's a lot of fun. And of course, our National Sprint Car Hall of Fame is right here in front of us. This is where everybody who has had their picture, or I'm sorry, everybody who's been inducted into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame has their picture on display on one of the kiosks inside. So you'll see famous race car drivers, mechanics, owners, promoters, riders, people who've made a lifetime contribution to the sport of sprint car racing. It definitely is a lifetime accomplishment to be inducted into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. And our Hall of Fame is one of the hardest one in all of sports to get into. We're members of the International Sports Heritage Association, which is a fancy way of saying Hall of Fames across the world, not just in America. But we get together annually and talk about our induction process, how people become inducted, and the different business things associated with the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and other Hall of Fames. And we have a two-step process. It's very, very complete. And not only that, we have over 70 voters across the country that are evenly divided on our National Induction Committee who actually do the nominations and voting on who becomes inducted. So it's not an easy process like I was mentioning earlier. The Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio is the hardest one to get into. Ours is the second hardest in all of sports Hall of Fames to be inducted into. It's kind of fun for me, being a big race fan, to walk through here and see the different drivers and people in the sport that I've known in the past and are still with us that have been inducted in the past into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. So you just really relish all the different stories and the people who've made an accomplishment to propel sprint car racing to being the major sport that it is right now. Here she is. This is McKenna. These are all photos of McKenna, and we have her driver's uniform. We just finished doing the floor, so where is she at? Here she is. That's McKenna's driver's uniform. She was 17 years old and the first girl to ever win, first lady to ever win a sprint car feature here at Knoxville Raceway when she was 17. It was a big week for McKenna because the next day she graduated valedictorian of her class at Carlisle High School. And then the next Tuesday, she was on ESPN Sports Center as the Athlete of the Week. So pretty big couple of days for McKenna. McKenna's a big fan of the New York Stock Exchange, so she ran the New York Stock Exchange ticker tape across the bottom of her helmet. And so McKenna lives in Indianapolis now and races in Indianapolis, Illinois, and Ohio, back in the Midwest in that part of the country. So she's still sprint car racing. She owns her own race team and race cars. Hires her own people, mechanics, and everybody to help her with the car. And she's quite an accomplishment story and a very good role model for young people.
How old is she now?
Oh, she was 17 back in, what year was that she won? 2014. Okay. And that was 10 years ago, so she's probably 26 or 27 now.
Okay.
Yeah. If you ever get a chance to interview her, she's a good person to talk to. We just installed this. It's kind of one of our new toys or features. It's a touch screen, so when race fans come into the museum, they can pick which video that they would like to watch. So being kind of a history nut, I'm going to pick this one here on the old board tracks. A lot of people don't know, but besides pavement racing and dirt track racing, they used to race on wooden race tracks.
Some people said the races were crazy. Fearless. Imagine racing around speeds of over 125 miles an hour on banked oval tracks.
Is there any way that we can bring the lights up a little bit so I can show people what this theater looks like?
Sure, absolutely. We can. Is that too much, or we can go?
That's good.
Okay.
I'll just walk up.
Okay.
These skinny, high-pressure tires. Sometimes they just blew out from hitting holes in the track caused by rotted wood or from termites eating the wood. When that happened, the car would go into a whipsaw of spins, and the driver had to try and guide it to the infield in the center of the track. If they couldn't do that, the car would smash right through the outer railing and fall many feet to the ground.
Storage space, but this is one of our suites, and we lease the suites out annually for the season here at Knoxville. We're very fortunate that all of our suites are leased out for the coming season, and we do have a large waiting list for the next year's season. So sprint car racing is very popular right now. You can see the racetrack from this suite. It gives you an excellent view. You can hear the wind blowing around a little bit. Excellent view of Knoxville Raceway from the suites, where you can sit inside or outside for all the races here, 30 nights of racing, every Saturday night. This year starting on April the 20th. So Knoxville is a big half-mile dirt track.
It looks like there's some ongoing maintenance right now. They're doing some.
They were out working on the track yesterday and the day before. They just put some new dirt on the track last fall, and those machines are sheep's foot that you see there with the big spikes in them. They drive those, they pull them around the racetrack to help push the dirt together, to compact it, to give it a smoother racing surface so it doesn't come apart when those big race tires dig into it to get traction. So they've been working on the track off and on for several days whenever the weather's nice, to get it in preparation for April 20th opening night here.
That's coming quick.
Yep,
for you.
about 2 months away. Yep. Yep. We really are spoiled to have such a nice place to showcase sprint car racing. When we have other events here for like late model racing or modified racing or motorcycle racing, the race fans come to our museum, they always say exactly the same thing. We sure wish we had a place like this for motorcycle racing. We sure wish we had a place like this for modified racing. We sure wish the dirt late model racing had a Hall of Fame like this for dirt racing late models. So that's a pretty good compliment for us when sprint car racing has such a nice place to showcase our sport, not just to sprint car fans, but to the whole world.
Yeah, it's nice up here.